Hello, folks. Before we slip into tonight's darkness, tap like and subscribe. It keeps the nightmares coming. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time the shadows found you. Ready? Let's begin. I grew up in Camden, Tennessee, one of those river towns where everybody can recite your family tree the way other people quote scripture. It was the bicentennial summer of '76, and I had just turned 17. My days were carved into neat slices like school, Zion Baptist on Wednesdays and Sundays, and the occasional double feature at the Parkway Drive-In over in Jackson with my best friend Cassie. Daddy kept a modest hardware store on Court Street, and Mama ironed pillowcases so crisp they could stand on their own. Life was steady, almost metronomic, right up until Lucas Barrett drifted in like heat haze over asphalt. Lucas was Judge Martin Barrett's only son, and the old judge could hush a room simply by straightening his spine. Folks in Benton County either feared him or prayed him into their dinner blessings. Lucas, though, was all summer charm, with sun-bleached hair that curled at the ends, a drawl slow as molasses, and a grin that made half the choir forget their hymns. We started meeting in secret after the 4th of July fireworks down at Birdsong Creek. I didn't dare tell Cassie. I already knew the verdict town gossips would hand me. Hardware store girl aiming too high. The evening I realized I was pregnant. I was perched on my quilt-covered bed, studying a drugstore test I'd bought in Huntington, 2 towns over, just so no one would spot me. My fingers shook so hard, I nearly dropped it. Lucas was the first person I told. He went pale, chewing the inside of his cheek like it might give him answers. The next afternoon he returned, eyes red-rimmed, and said his family would see to everything. I was naive enough to think he meant support. I didn't see how literal he'd been until it was far too late. Within a week, my world collapsed like wet cardboard. Mama and Daddy were informed, via a prim letter on courthouse stationery, that their daughter had suffered a nervous spell. That phrase spread through Camden quicker than kudzu. For my health, they said, I'd be recuperating someplace quiet. 2 days later, I was bundled into Judge Barrett's Buick and driven 50-odd miles to a sagging farmhouse outside Parsons by Lucas's Uncle Grant, who never spoke a syllable the whole ride. I stared out the window, watching soybean fields smear into green streaks, feeling myself fade like an old Polaroid. The house belonged to Cousin Viola, Mama's kin 3 branches over, a widow in her late 60s who wore orthopedic shoes and kept the curtains pinned shut against daylight. The place smelled of dust, mothballs, and loneliness. No TV, no radio, just stacks of devotional pamphlets and a Bible so thin its pages rustled like dry leaves. Days blurred into each other. I'd stand at the back window, studying the empty pasture rolling toward the Tennessee River, half convinced time itself had stopped. Nights were worse. Floors groaning, wind threading through cracks, coyotes howling as if they pitied me. I wasn't allowed into town. Viola said Camden gossip could kill a body faster than cancer. Letters from home never came. Neither did Cassie's cheerful postcards. My belly grew, and so did the silence surrounding it. I whispered to the baby so I wouldn't forget my own voice, promising, I'll get us out, I swear. Sometimes I prayed, sometimes I cussed. Mostly I waited. One August morning, gravel crunched in the drive. Through the sliver between curtains, I saw Judge Barrett's black Buick shimmering in the heat. He didn't step inside. Instead, he spoke to Viola on the porch, voice low and even. After he left, she brought me a battered suitcase. "They've arranged a better facility," she said, eyes fixed on the floorboards. I asked where. She only pointed at the case and shuffled away. Sleep eluded me that night. I replayed every possible escape until dawn painted the sky peach. Just after sunup, Lucas arrived. He looked thinner, haunted, but wouldn't meet my gaze. Viola pressed the suitcase into his hands. He muttered something about a clinic in Birmingham. No questions, all expenses handled. Panic clawed at me. I begged him to tell my parents the truth, to stand beside me. His patience snapped. "It's too late, May. Papers are filed." The finality in his voice was colder than January river water. I never saw the inside of that clinic. After Viola's snores settled into the walls, I hoisted the suitcase and slipped through the kitchen door. I walked the county road beneath a half-lit moon, gravel popping under borrowed sneakers. Hours later, sore to the bone, I reached an all-night Gulf station near Lexington. The teenage clerk, hair past his shoulders and kindness in his eyes, let me use the pay phone. The only number lodged in my memory was Cassie's. When she answered, words snagged in my throat. All I managed was, "It's me. Please come." Cassie barreled up 6 hours later in her brother's dented Chevy Nova. She cried when she saw my swollen belly, then spat out every rumor Camden had swallowed. I'd been carted to some private asylum in Arizona. Visitation forbiddens. Breakdown cited. Lucas, it seemed, had waltzed back to the University of Tennessee like summer was just a song that ended. Cassie's parents tucked me into their basement on Bluff Street. No questions, just casseroles and guarded smiles. I hid there 3 quiet weeks, listening to floorboards creak overhead and my baby kick against my ribs. A counselor at First Light Women's Shelter in Memphis finally found us an open bed. I gave birth there under the pink glow of dawn, an 8-pound girl with a storm of black hair. I named her Grace because surviving felt like exactly that. Years slipped by. Grace grew wild and bright, and I built a life. Night classes at Southwest Tennessee Community College, a bookkeeping job by day, and a new last name nobody in Camden could pronounce. The whole truth reached me by accident. At a cousin's wedding in Chattanooga, one of Lucas's relatives got drunk on Jack Daniels and bragged about the Barrett's cleanup operation, forged psychiatric evaluations, a doctor on retainer, hush money swept through shell charities. I sat in the ladies' room, palms flat against cool tile, realizing I had almost been erased on legal letterhead. I never laid eyes on Lucas again. Last I heard, he slipped into his father's law firm like a hand into a tailored glove. Meanwhile, Grace is a junior at Vanderbilt now, sharp as barbed wire and twice as determined. She doesn't know the full story yet. One day I'll tell her, not for sympathy, but so she understands the lengths people travel to safeguard power, and the longer road you sometimes have to walk to safeguard yourself. Back in Camden, whispers about May's breakdown still linger like chimney smoke on cold mornings. Let them. Disappearing became the neatest trick I ever pulled. The truth is, I didn't vanish. I endured, suitcase in hand, moonlit road beneath my feet, and a promise. Now 5'9" and fearless, standing proof that I did more than survive. I have never been the kind of person who knocks on wood or throws salt over her shoulder. Ghost stories roll off me, and talk of witches or hidden mountain cults usually gets an eye roll. I am 29, and rent the back half of a small duplex in Eugene, Oregon. And until a few weeks ago, the only things that kept me up at night were my student loan balance and a weird gurgle my bathroom sink makes after midnight. On most weekends, I drive east with a few college friends for day hikes. We do it to clear our heads and pretend we are still adventurous. This last trip took us into the Willamette National Forest, about 90 minutes past Oak Ridge on Highway 58. The land is public and mostly ignored by tourists. All tall firs and thick carpets of moss that swallow cell signals. It was just me, Mason, Levi, and Tessa, backpacks full of trail mix and cheap instant coffee packets. No big plans, just photos and fresh air. I wish we had turned around the moment we saw that first totem. We had drifted off the marked trail, like we always do once the official path feels too tame. Tessa spotted what looked like a deer skull wired to a cedar trunk. We figured it was a hunter's trophy or a prank. Then we noticed more. Rough wooden crosses tilted into the soil, strips of flannel tied to low branches, and little stick dolls crusted with mud. Some of the cloth looked decades old, dangling in threads. Melted candle stubs had burrowed into the loam like pale grubs. The air felt wrong there, as if the forest were holding its breath. Nobody said so, but we all felt it. I snapped close-ups of the crosses, a broken antler skull, a battered hoodie with a dark, rusty stain at the pocket. Levi told me to quit it, but I figured the photos would make a great "look what we found" post. Deeper in the grove stood one enormous Douglas fir, older than anything around it, its bark tattooed with carvings and more bones nailed to the trunk. We circled it silently, staring until Mason muttered, "Let's get out of here." No one argued. We backtracked to the main trail and did not stop until we reached the car. That should have been it. After I got back to Eugene, I uploaded 3 of the pictures to Reddit. No faces, no geotags. A few hours after midnight, my phone chimed. The message had no words, just a photograph. At first, I could not tell what I was seeing. Then it clicked, my own driveway shot from the street. My Subaru was in the frame, porch light glowing. The timestamp said it was taken minutes before. I sprinted to the window. Nothing moved but the wind. I did not sleep. Every passing headlight sent me checking curtains. At 3:12 am another text arrived. Another photo, closer this time. My front window, curtain half drawn, blue wash of the TV visible. I was in that room when the picture was taken. Heart in my throat, I threw open the door and yelled into the dark. Silence answered. I double-checked every deadbolt. In the morning I called Mason, trying not to sound unhinged. He hesitated, then told me he had received a blank gray image around 2 in the morning. Levi and Tessa, they had not gotten anything. All of us felt uneasy, like we had stumbled onto something meant to stay hidden. I deleted the Reddit post and purged the pics from my phone, though it felt pointless. That afternoon, I mounted a budget security camera over the front door. It did not make me feel safer. Nothing happened that night, but when I reviewed the footage next morning, there it was. 2:47 a figure stepped onto my porch and stood motionless for nearly 5 minutes. No knocking, no doorbell, just standing. The video was grainy, but I could make out a hood, dark jeans, and something hanging from a cord around the neck, maybe a bone. At one point, the person tilted their head toward the lens, but the face was a black oval. I filed a report with the Lane County Sheriff. They were polite, copied the file to a thumb drive, and promised to step up patrols. Nothing changed. By week's end, Tessa called sobbing. Her cat was missing, and her back door was ajar, though she swore she had locked it. She refused to stay in the house alone after that. Levi grew quiet, said branches snapped outside his bedroom window every night. He lives in Springfield, on a busy street, but he swore the sounds were deliberate. We all agreed on one point. We should never have touched that grove, and definitely never have posted about it. I began leaving lights on in every room, a glowing belt of reassurance. The texts kept coming, but the pattern shifted. No more photos, only single words. Repent, return, watch. Sometimes just a buzz at 2 a.m. No content at all. I stopped opening them. I changed numbers. It did not matter. Messages still arrived from random, untraceable senders. They felt less like someone trying to talk and more like someone reminding me they could. 3 days later, I found something nailed to the maple in my tiny backyard. A crude pine cross wrapped with crow feathers and red string. My gate was locked, the fence intact. I called the police again. They took another report and recommended motion lights. That night, I slept in my car 2 blocks away, engine off, seat reclined, jacket for a blanket. I watched my duplex from a distance, but saw nothing. Then, without warning, everything stopped. No more late-night pings, no shadows on the camera, no strange noises. Even the air inside the house seemed lighter, like a window had been cracked open. I never learned who sent the photos or who prowled my porch, and none of us uncovered who hammered that cross into my tree. Mason moved to Denver for a job and refuses to talk about Oregon. Tessa quit hiking and deleted her Instagram. Levi scrubbed every trace of himself from social media. Our group chat is silent. Each of us is pretending distance will keep the memory at bay, but nighttime has a long reach. I still think of that ancient fir, the bone nails, the way the clearing felt, as if it had waited decades for witnesses. I hike close to town now, never alone, and I do not stray from maintained paths. Some evenings, while brushing my teeth, I swear I hear a faint knock somewhere in the duplex. I freeze, toothbrush in hand, and listen until the silence starts to hum. I never investigate. I do not want proof. The worst part is the mystery, not knowing what we interrupted, why it followed us, or if it waits still. I have learned that certain places are forgotten on purpose, and some things once stirred refuse to settle. I grew up in Haddam, Kansas, one of those dots on Highway 36 most Atlases skip. Everybody there knows the color of your mailbox and whether your dad's pickup topped 200,000 miles. I'm 28 now, yet the Saturday I was 14 still runs on loop in my head, a film reel that never finishes. Back then, Halloween was our Super Bowl of mischief. Candy mattered in grade school, but by junior high, the headline act was tormenting old Mr. Harper. His place was the last brick house before the asphalt gave up to miles of Milo, porch sagging toward the weeds. He was past 70, wore chest-high khakis and a mustard-blotted undershirt, and despised kids, especially my brother Luke and me. Each October, it became Harper versus the Miller boys. 5th grade, we flung toilet paper over his sycamores. 6th grade, we coiled a rubber rattlesnake in his mailbox. By 8th grade, we planted latex arms in his begonias, popped stink pellets under his bedroom window, and Luke tucked a Bluetooth speaker in the hedge that shrieked banshee wails at random. Harper would charge outside, waving his maglite like a cavalry saber, voice crackling with threats. But he never called Mom, never dialed 911. He just promised our day would come. That year, Halloween landed on a warm Saturday. Luke and I had mapped out our masterpiece for weeks, but at sunset, walking past Harper's place, we froze. His porch was decked out, cardboard skeletons taped to the bay window, an inflatable jack-o'-lantern bobbing in the breeze, purple string lights buzzing over the railing. The setup looked fresh from the clearance aisle of the Walmart in Concordia, but Harper had never decorated before. Luke jabbed my shoulder. "He's trying to flex," he said. "We can't let him win." We waited until 10:30, after Main Street dulled to crickets and porch lights winked off. Luke's backpack bulged with harmless chaos: smoke canisters, a motion trigger shriek box, and a thrift store baby doll painted crimson. We slid down the drainage ditch behind Harper's fence, crouched beneath the hedge, and listened. The orange porch bulb trembled, yet no television hum, no radio, not even Harper's dusty transistor that usually muttered royal scores. The silence felt staged. We didn't realize he'd already broken our script. We split up like always. Luke looped toward the weather-beaten shed hugging the alley. I crept nearer the kitchen windows. I crouched to plant the shriek box when I noticed the inflatable pumpkin sagging, air hissing as though knifed, though no one stood near it. Maybe a scene tore, I told myself, but dread crawled up my spine. I ducked behind the hydrangeas, waiting for Luke's flashlight wink. Instead, I heard the shed latch clack, then a metallic slam that rattled the night, followed by nothing. No crunch of gravel, no Luke. 60 seconds stretched into 2 minutes. I whispered his name. The dark swallowed it. I crept to the shed. Its boards were gray and rotting, but a new brass padlock gleamed on the door. Luke had no key. I rapped softly. "Luke?" Silence. Louder. Nothing. That's when I saw a trail camera bolted high in the corner, red LED blinking. Under it, a cardboard sign read in thick marker, "Gotcha." My gut plunged, skin prickling like static. I backed away, scanning the yard, expecting Harper to charge out. No one. Just that charged stillness. I yanked the padlock. It held. I smashed it with a stone. Metal rang but didn't give. Inside, I thought I heard a muffled shuffle. Maybe Luke whispering through duct tape. Panic flared. I sprinted to Elm Street's lone street lamp and froze, lungs hitching. 2 options: pound on our parents' door and confess years of harassment, or break Luke out before dawn. The wind smelled of cut corn and trouble. I stared at Harper's silhouette, then at the silent road. No headlights, no salvation. One chose my brother. I bolted back, rattling every door and window along the house. All locked tight. Sweat beaded on my neck despite the chill. Circling again, I found a basement window with flaking wood. I slid Luke's screwdriver from the prank bag, levered the frame, and pried until it splintered enough for me to wriggle through. Stale air slapped me. The basement stank of mildew and iron. Shelves sagged under dusty tools and unopened Halloween kits. Masks, fog machines, plastic limbs. Harper hadn't decorated for fun. He'd been stockpiling ammo. I tiptoed upstairs, counting every creak. In the kitchen, a warm-to-the-touch flashlight rested on the table. Harper had just been there. I unlocked the back door, dashed to the shed, and worked the hinge bolts with the screwdriver. It felt like an hour, but was maybe 5 minutes before the door groaned open. Luke sat on the dirt floor, knees to his chest, face chalk white. Photos papered the walls, prints of us from grade school to last week, tossing eggs, walking home, snapshots through our bedroom window. Luke's wrists were taped, but he was unharmed. Harper hadn't wanted to hurt him, only to scare us with proof. I've watched you for years. Tonight is your lesson. We didn't speak, we just ran. We dashed across Mill Creek like our shoes were on fire, ignoring the icy water soaking our jeans. We didn't slow until we reached the abandoned grain elevator beside the Union Pacific tracks. Luke tore the tape from his wrists. I hurled the screwdriver into the weeds, terrified Harper could trace it back. We huddled on a concrete slab until dawn streaked pink over the silo panels, breathing fog into the chill. We made a pact never to mention the photographs, never to admit how close we'd drifted to something darker than a prank. 9th grade sent Luke to a magnet high school in Salina. I buried myself in welding at the co-op in Concordia. Years slid by, but every late October my nerves vibrated like someone plucking guitar strings inside my chest. One college break, Luke texted a single photo, Harper's porch through a windshield. Same dollar store skeletons, same half-deflated pumpkin. The caption said, "He's waiting." I stared at it until the screen dimmed and shoved the phone face down. Mom sold our house 2 summers ago. On moving day, I detoured down Elm Street in broad daylight. Harper's shingles were curling, shutters askew. Yet in the parlor window, I saw boxes labeled Halloween stacked like sentries, ready for duty. I kept the engine running. Friends ask why I don't host Halloween parties. I joke adulthood drains the sugar, but that's not it. The truth is, I'm still in that yard at 14, weighing whether courage is worth the price. Some nights on Interstate 70, hauling steel toward Denver, I glimpsed the rear-view mirror, half expecting purple bulbs bobbing in the darkness, chasing me west. Maybe Harper never wanted revenge, only respect. Maybe he enjoyed reminding us the hunter changes masks. Either way, the board stays set. Mischief grows old, yet it never dies. It just picks new players. And when the first leaf turns orange, I feel Haddam call my name, daring me to step back over that property line and spin the wheel again. I've never posted anything like this before, but after what happened 2 years ago, I need to spill it somewhere. Maybe someone out there went through something similar. I'm 20 now, yet this all went down when I was 18, senior year, counting the days until graduation. I grew up in Monmouth, Illinois, the kind of place where the grain elevator is taller than any office building and everyone can name your dog. Secrets bounce around town faster than a foul ball at a Cubs game, which only made everything worse. Back then, I had just started dating a girl named Lauren, and life finally felt uncomplicated. Then a blast from the past crashed back in. Her name was Cassidy, someone I hadn't spoken to since middle school. Cassidy and I dated for, 3 months in 7th grade. Mostly we shared fries at the Warren County Fair and texted about video games after homework. Innocent stuff. One night she popped up on Instagram out of nowhere, responding to a picture of me and Lauren at Lake Story in Galesburg. She wrote, "Long time no see. Hope you're doing great." At first, it was harmless. We exchanged stories, teased each other about our old MySpace haircuts, and I told her right away that I had a girlfriend. Cassidy didn't blink. She said she was happy for me and that she'd love to catch up if I was ever in Peoria. where she was living and working part-time at a coffee shop near Bradley University. I figured, cool old friend checking in. Nothing more. Weeks went by and the chats stayed friendly. Then the cadence shifted. Her messages came daily, then hourly, then at weird times, 2:11 and 3:38 in the morning. I woke up one morning to a wall of text about missing how we used to talk and how seeing me with Lauren made her stomach knot. That's when alarms went off. I showed Lauren the screenshots. She laughed it off, but I saw her smile falter. Soon Cassidy slipped from pixels to pavement. On a Saturday afternoon, Lauren and I ducked into the Route 34 diner for burgers. Cassidy sat alone in a corner booth. No food, just tapping her nails on Formica. Her eyes locked on us through the reflection in the jukebox glass. She never said a word. Lauren left half her milkshake untouched. 2 days later, Lauren's phone pinged. A burner account with no avatar. The first message read, "He'll trade you in like last season's cleats." The next one had an old photo of me in 8th grade wearing a ridiculous fedora, something only Cassidy could have stored. The angle made it look recent. More doctored photos followed, each sent to random classmates' group chats. By third period English, everyone was whispering. Hallways echoed with snickers. Overnight, I went from quiet baseball kid to that dude from the cringy pics. Lauren tried to shrug it off, but I watched her shoulders tense. She stopped posting selfies, avoided pep rallies, and finally asked if we could pause the relationship because the drama was suffocating her. I couldn't blame her. Meanwhile, Cassidy's presence thickened like humidity before a storm. I noticed a silver Honda Civic idling on our block around midnight more than once. One evening, I rolled our trash can to the curb and saw the Civic parked 2 houses down, lights off, engine running. When I stepped toward it, the headlights flared and the car drifted away. I told my parents. Dad chuckled and muttered something about teenage hormones. Mom suggested blocking Cassidy. Blocking worked about, as well as plywood against a tornado. New accounts sprang up same tone, different usernames. Sleep became a memory. I spent nights peeking through blinds, phone in hand, pulse pounding each time it buzzed. The school counselor offered sympathy, but said because everything was off-campus digital behavior, their hands were tied. Cassidy seemed to sense that nobody would intervene. She escalated. One afternoon, I found a note wedged under my wiper in the Monmouth High parking lot. Red Sharpie, shaky letters. You smile at her like I never existed. After that, I parked behind the vacant feed store on US 67. I withdrew from friends, deleted Instagram, even changed my Snapchat handle. Still, Cassidy's shadow clung. Once at 2 o'clock at night, someone rapped 3 times on my bedroom window. I yanked the curtains. No one stood there, but the Civic sat half a block away, exhaust curling in the streetlight. The final blow happened in Geneseo, where Lauren lived. She called hysterical. Someone kept knocking on her window and whispering her name. Her dad stormed outside with a mag light, but whoever it was vanished. Lauren swore she saw Cassidy's profile duck below the sill. I sped there and dialed the Henry County Sheriff from her driveway. Deputies took statements, but said without proof it was a he said, she said situation. Cassidy denied everything, claimed I was harassing her, and somehow flipped the script so convincingly that Lauren's parents insisted she cut ties with me. They blocked my number that night. Then silence. No D-Miz, no Civic, no Sharpie notes. Cassidy disappeared, as suddenly as she'd surfaced. I don't know whether someone confronted her or she found a new fixation. The fallout, though, stuck. Lauren and I never patched things. Around town, the episode became a shorthand joke. Watch out or you'll get Cassidy'd. I kept my head down, pushed through graduation, and left for community college in Springfield. Occasionally, I doom scroll Cassidy's social media. Last I checked, she was engaged to a guy from Bloomington, grinning in pumpkin patch photos, looking downright normal. Does he know her history? Maybe she really changed. Maybe I was just a chapter that spiraled. I still flinch when I see a silver Civic in my rearview mirror. I hesitate before accepting any follow request without a face. It's been nearly 2 years, and while life has leveled out, part of me wonders if she'll reappear the way thunderstorms roll across the prairie quiet sky one minute, sirens blaring the next. I signed the lease on that place during my sophomore year at Northern Arizona University because it was the only apartment in Flagstaff I could afford on a student budget without taking on a roommate. The building was a lopsided fourplex hidden behind an abandoned Sinclair station off old Route 66, next to a couple of weed-choked lots that looked like nothing had grown there in years. The rent was low, the paperwork was minimal, and Mrs. Carter, the owner, who lived 3 towns over, barely asked a thing. At 19, that felt like a jackpot. My unit sat on the second-floor front corner with a view of the Little America truck stop's glowing sign. Mrs. Carter told me the apartment directly above mine had been empty since the summer before last. Nobody's bothered with it since the guy before you moved out, she said, as if that should make me sleep easier. I figured an unused apartment overhead meant peace and quiet for late-night study sessions. The first few weeks were exactly that. The walls were paper-thin, but with no neighbor upstairs, there were no thumping boots or bass lines bleeding through the ceiling. For a while, it felt perfect. That changed around 2 in the morning, one Tuesday in September. I was hunched over my desk, cramming for a microbiology midterm, when I heard measured footsteps sweep across the ceiling. They weren't the faint pops of settling lumber or the hiss of plumbing. These sounded deliberate, heel to toe, like someone pacing from one side of the empty unit to the other. I paused my music, held my breath, and counted 5 slow steps before the sound stopped cold. I chalked it up to stress and went back to my flashcards. 24 hours later, the same thing happened. Same hour, same pattern. I jabbed the broom handle against the ceiling like a cartoon tenant, half expecting a return knock. Nothing. Irritated and more curious than afraid, I texted Mrs. Carter the next morning. She replied after lunch, "Still vacant. Probably old copper pipes. Don't worry." I knew pipes clanked and groaned, but they didn't march in circles. Her shrug of a reply should have calmed me, yet it did the opposite. Over the next week, the footsteps crept up in frequency. Always past midnight, always that awkward, uneven pacing. Whenever they started, the air inside my living room seemed to get heavier, as though someone turned down the oxygen. I caught myself holding breaths without realizing it, waiting for the next muffled step. It wasn't just sound. 3 nights in a row, I shot awake in the dark with the unshakable certainty that another set of eyes was fixed on me. There were no intruders. The door was dead-bolted, the windows latched, but the sensation crawled over my skin like static. I'd sweep the tiny apartment with a flashlight, find nothing, then lie in bed staring at the ceiling boards, knowing the vacant unit sat only a few feet above. One Friday, a loud, sodden thump rattled the ceiling while I was brushing my teeth. It sounded like something heavy dropping onto old wood. Adrenaline shoved me down the hall toward the back stairwell, the one leading to the top-floor apartment. I hadn't examined that door since move-in, assuming it was padlocked, but the knob now dangled by a single screw, and splinters curled out from the jamb where the strike plate should have been. I stared, toothbrush still foaming in my hand, fighting the urge to sprint back to the safety of my sofa. Curiosity won. I nudged the door with my sneaker. The hinge groaned like it hadn't budged in decades. A sour, dusty smell billowed out. I swept my flashlight up the narrow stairs. The beam caught long gray streaks on both walls, as if something or someone had dragged rough palms along the paint while ascending. Each step moaned under my weight. At the top, the apartment door stood ajar by 2 inches. I pushed it open with a finger. No electricity, no furniture, only moonlight from a cracked window and my shaking flashlight beam. In the center of the warped floorboards lay a stained, gutted mattress. It rested exactly above where my bed sat downstairs. I edged closer until the light revealed dark rust-colored patches soaked deep into the fabric. They were too extensive, too old, to be coffee or wine. My stomach lurched. I backed out, down the stairs, into my own unit, and slammed the door so hard, picture frame fell off the wall. Sleep never came that night. I dragged a chair under the knob, switched on every lamp, and waited. At 3:33, the marching began again, heavier than before. After a minute, the cadence shifted into a slow drag, like someone pulling a sack across bare boards. Then 3 booming impacts landed directly above my couch, knees or fists hitting wood, maybe. The noise wasn't hollow. It sounded close and solid, almost as though the ceiling itself had thickened. My thumb hovered over 911, but dread rooted me in place. How could I explain breaking into the upstairs unit, the mattress, the sounds? By dawn, I gathered enough nerve to sneak back into the stairwell, phone camera ready to document the broken lock. The knob, though, was perfectly straight. Fresh screws shone in morning light, and a new strike plate sat flush against an undamaged frame. I scrolled through last night's photo of the splintered jamb to be certain I wasn't losing it. Mrs. Carter met me that afternoon in her cluttered office behind a rundown antique shop in Winslow. I showed her the picture and tried to sound rational. She frowned, told me the upstairs door had been reinforced months earlier, and suggested I schedule fewer all-nighters. When I asked if anyone else had keys, she admitted she'd lost hers years ago, but insisted the place was sealed. I left feeling like I'd walked out of a magician's show without learning the trick. That evening, I crashed on the couch again. Apartment lit up like a stadium. Silence. The following night, same glowing lights, nothing. The quiet felt staged, intentional, like a hunter holding its breath. I started spending every late night in Klein Library, pretended to study, and dozed in lecture halls. When friends in Prescott invited me for the weekend, I leapt at the chance. Anything to stay away from that building. 2 weeks later, I returned on a Sunday evening to grab textbooks and clean clothes. The living room looked untouched, dishes still in the sink. I crossed into the bedroom and froze. 3 neat round dents marred the ceiling plaster directly over my pillows, spaced exactly where knees would land if someone dropped hard onto the floor above. I had stared at that ceiling every night. The surface had been smooth. My pulse hammered so loud it drowned out traffic from Milton Road. I stuffed clothes into a duffel and walked out without shutting the lights. By Monday morning, my resignation notice was in Mrs. Carter's inbox. I forfeited the deposit and slept on a classmate's futon until finals ended. I never set foot in that fourplex again. I kept quiet about it. Who would believe a story about phantom footsteps, a vanishing break-in, and a bloody mattress? Time should have dulled the memory, yet a full year later, I still replay every detail. I try to stitch together mundane explanations, squatters, stress, sleep paralysis, but none account for the repaired door, the dents, the suffocating hush that blanketed the apartment after each incident. Something lived in that boarded-up unit off Route 66, and whatever it was, it knew exactly where I slept. I am 33 now, but this happened when I was 26, right after I shut the door on my Denver apartment and drove east to help my mom recover from heart surgery. She still lived outside Hot Springs, Arkansas, in the Pine Valley I swore I would never see again. My days blurred into prescription runs on Central Avenue and physical therapy appointments at Chi St. Vincent. It was a quieter life I had not asked for, but blood is blood. Back in Denver, my life had been noisy. Light rail screech, neighbors arguing through drywall, coffee shops open past midnight. In Hot Springs, the loudest thing after dusk is the tree frogs on Lake Hamilton. I spent my first week pretending the change was temporary, canceling streaming subscriptions, leaving boxes half unpacked. By month 2, I knew the routine. Morning pills sorted in a plastic organizer, evening walks with my mom down Shady Heights Road, counting porch lights instead of skyscrapers. Still, every night I missed the hum of a city that neither needed nor noticed me. One Friday in late October, I drove to Glenwood to see Riley, an old college buddy. We grilled burgers, watched the Razorbacks lose, and lost track of the clock. By 10:35 p.m., I was easing my mom's battered Corolla onto the road home. The main artery, US 70, was down to one lane for construction, so I chose Bear Hollow Road, the winding forest backway that threads through the Wachitas. No lamps line that stretch, only starlight and the gray ribbon of pavement between black trunks. Cell coverage dies before the first bend. I rolled down both windows, let cool air fill the car, and cued an old Lucero playlist. 15 minutes in, roughly midway between Crystal Springs and Norman, a pair of headlights crested behind me. Hunters and loggers used the road, so at first I thought nothing of it. Night in the Wachitas has a particular texture. The air smells of damp mineral soil and decaying pine needles, and when wind slips through the crowns, it sounds like distant surf. My headlights carved a shaky tunnel ahead, catching moths and the sudden green flare of raccoon eyes. Every so often, a curve revealed the silhouette of an abandoned log cabin or a mailbox leaning like a question mark, reminders that people once tried to live this deep in the hills. The truck closed fast, hood dipping over every pothole. Square body, long mirrors. Late 80s Ford, maybe, 91. Its brights strobed again and again. I tapped my brakes. Nothing changed. Even on the brief straights it never tried to pass, just clung to my bumper like it was wired there. I nudged the Corolla 5 miles over the posted limit, then 10. The Ford matched each increase, the high beams bleaching my mirrors. The longer it lingered, the tighter my shoulders drew. I counted curves, calculating how many remained until Mount Ida, where the highway widens, and the sheriff sometimes parks his cruiser. At one point, I flicked the dome light on to check my phone, hoping for a bar of signal, but the screen stayed empty. Outside, the Ford's engine growled like a chainsaw, the vibrations traveling through the seatback. I could almost feel the driver watching, waiting for the slightest mistake. Instead, a lonely Valero station appeared at the junction with Highway 27, green neon buzzing like a beacon. I signaled early, tires crunching onto the gravel. The moment I crossed beneath the canopy, I checked the mirror. Nothing. The truck that had ridden me for 20 straight minutes was gone. No taillights shrinking in the dark. No engine noise. Just empty road. I told myself it had pulled down a Forest Service spur I missed, though I doubted any existed along that section. The convenience store was dark, except for a fridge light glowing behind the counter. A handwritten card on the door read back at 5:45 a.m. I start. Beneath the fluorescence, engine idling, and pretended to inspect the tires so my hands would stop shaking. Every half minute I scanned the highway. Wind rattled a plastic banner advertising live bait. After a few minutes, I moved to leave and noticed 2 fresh arcs of mud in the far corner of the lot, the waffle pattern of off-road tires still damp. They looped once by the dumpsters and pointed back toward the trees, as if a vehicle had circled, waited, and fled. A chill crawled up my back. I slid behind the wheel and floored it toward Mount Ida, chewing the inside of my cheek the whole way. Sleep never really came that night. I kept replaying the strobes, the tracks, the impossible absence. By noon, curiosity beat fear. I drove back to the station, sun high, gravel bright. Inside, a lanky clerk in a Hot Springs Trojans hoodie looked up from restocking jerky. His name tag read Devon. I asked whether their cameras had caught anything strange a few hours earlier. Devon hesitated, then ushered me behind the counter. Valero keeps an 8-camera DVR. At 10:58 p.m., a truck rolled in, the same boxy Ford, left headlamp flickering. It idled by the ice chest until 11 o'clock, then backed onto the highway and vanished east. 5 minutes later, at 11:05, my little Corolla glided beneath the canopy. From the camera's vantage, nothing followed me, nothing preceded me. Empty road, then my car. I felt my stomach lurch. Devon replayed the sequence 3 times. The timestamps never budged. The truck was there first, long gone before I arrived. I asked about blind spots. He shook his head, then said, almost casually, that I was not the first to ask. He told me base fishermen towing boats from Lake Washita have reported the same Ford shadowing them at dawn, only to melt away near Brady Mountain. A delivery driver from Mena swore it forced him onto the shoulder, then evaporated when he stepped out with a tire iron. Each time they checked the footage, the timeline showed the truck arriving ahead of the people it supposedly chased. In quieter moments, I have tried logical explanations. Maybe the camera clock was off, or maybe there were 2 near-identical trucks prowling those roads as some elaborate prank. I even convinced a tech-savvy cousin in Fayetteville to analyze the footage frame by frame. He found nothing but pixel noise and an overexposed license plate that blurred into whiteness. Each hypothesis collapses under the same question. Why did my rear window feel hot with light all the way to the station if the truck was already gone? I bought a coffee I did not want, stepped outside, and squinted into harsh daylight. Where the damp tracks had been the night before, the gravel looked undisturbed. No impressions, no drip of mud, just dust and sun. Since then, I have taken Bear Hollow Road only in daylight and never alone. I have not seen the ford again, yet every ridge and switchback feels charged, as if the mirrors might fill with white light at any moment. Friends in Little Rock laugh until I share the DVR detail. Then nobody has anything to say. Some nights, listening to the steady hum of my mom's oxygen concentrator, I wonder whether the truck meant harm or warning. Maybe it was steering me away from a fallen tree or a drunk driver. Maybe it raced to the station first for reasons I will never grasp. I have searched accident reports for that stretch and come up empty. A part of me hopes to camp at the junction with a thermos and a DSLR until the ford shows again. Writing this now, I can see the ridgeline from the porch. Evening sun is sliding behind Hickory Nut Mountain, washing the sky in copper. In a minute, the cicadas will start, and the county road will settle into its nighttime emptiness. I do not expect to hear that ford again, yet part of me almost wants to, because at least then the story would move instead of looping on itself like bad tape. For now, all I have is the memory of blinding lights, fresh mud, and a timeline that refuses to make sense. If you ever drive the Wachitas after dark, and a dusty blue Ford with no plates fills your mirror, keep rolling until you find bright lights and a running camera. Then check your watch. You may arrive before it does, or long after. I am not entirely sure why I am writing this down. Part of me still needs someone to confirm I did not dream it up, that what happened up at that lakefront cabin was real, and I am not simply unraveling. It all took place in late October of last year. My divorce papers had been stamped 3 weeks earlier, and I wanted one thing: quiet. No traffic, no work notifications, no well-meaning friends tiptoeing around my feelings. Scrolling through rental sites, one found a listing for a fishing cabin on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, about 10 miles west of Big Bay, near the edge of Lake Independence. No neighbors, no cell service, and a generator for emergency power. Perfect. The photos showed a small one-bedroom lodge tucked under red pines with a narrow porch and an old stone hearth. I booked it for 14 nights, loaded up my SUV, and left Grand Rapids without telling anyone exactly where I was headed. I craved the silence that only thick forest can provide. The first 3 days were everything I needed. Nights were sharp with early frost, but the shed was full of seasoned birch, and I spent daylight hours cooking on the iron stove, reading dog-eared paperbacks, and wandering the game trails that ribbon through the Huron Mountains. A footpath behind the cabin dropped to a shallow creek lined with tamaracks, and I would sit on a fallen log at sunrise with a thermos of coffee, listening to loons echo off the water. After a decade of city noise, that kind of stillness feels almost unreal. On the fourth evening, tiny details began to annoy me. My bag of trail mix felt lighter than I remembered, and a cool draft curled across my neck, even though I had latched the front door. I blamed it on fatigue and the emotional sludge I was wading through. Then I spotted muddy prints on the porch board's clear boot treads, tracking a slow circle around the railing. It had not rained since the day I arrived, yet the ground along the creek was still damp. Whoever made those marks had been watching, not passing by. I stared at the pattern for a long time, inventing explanations that did not involve another person. Maybe a hiker, maybe a local checking on the property, maybe even an oddly shaped bear track. They were none of those. That night, the roof groaned in short, deliberate intervals, as if someone was stepping carefully from rafter to rafter. Wind swept through the pines now and then, but the noises did not match the gusts. I lay awake until dawn, the fire reduced to embers, counting each creak. The next morning, my stomach hit the floor. A can of chili I had placed on the counter one of 6 I brought was gone. Not misplaced, not rolled under a cabinet, simply vanished. When you are alone in deep woods, an object missing from inside your locked cabin feels like your pulse has been yanked out of your chest. I tore through every drawer and shelf to prove myself wrong, but the can was not there. It meant someone had come inside while I slept. I drove south to Marquette, 40-odd minutes of gravel and 2-lane blacktop, and bought a cheap trail camera from a sporting goods aisle that smelled like rubber boots. I told myself it was for wildlife footage, maybe a bobcat nosing around, but I knew better. I made it back before the sun slid behind the trees and strapped the camera to a spruce trunk, angled toward the path that paralleled the creek. That night I kept the hearth dark, wrapped in a wool blanket with a headlamp resting on my knee. The roof noises returned, softer now, accompanied by the faint rustle of leaves where wind could not reach. Sleep never came. Only when gray light seeped through the curtains did I step outside to collect the SD card, hands shaking enough that I nearly dropped it in the moss. Most of the clips were harmless. A red squirrel chattering, a white-tailed deer browsing, the cabin glowing faintly under moonlight. At 2:43 MA, however, a frame froze my breath. A man stood motionless at the tree line, hood drawn tight, face lost in shadow. He did not shift, did not lean closer. He just watched the cabin for nearly 5 minutes before the file ended. I replayed it a dozen times, hoping for some trick of refraction, but the silhouette never altered. I almost left that afternoon, yet stubbornness or pride glued me there. That evening, I barricaded the bedroom door with a chair, placed a fillet knife on the knitstand, and set small spruce twigs in an upside-down V against the threshold, a marker I would notice if disturbed. By dawn, a twig was missing, another can of chili was gone, and a dark smear of mud streaked the inside handle of the front door. The realization that someone had stood inches from me while I slept made my skin crawl. My gut flipped. I packed everything's sleeping bag still damp, half-read book, camera, and threw it all in the back of the SUV. Before starting the engine, I checked the camera one final time. The last clip, time-stamped 5:51 mm, showed the same hooded figure 20 feet closer, framed between 2 birches. He held something long and narrow, maybe a pry bar or walking stick, clenched in a white-knuckled grip. He stared straight into the lens until the recording timed out. I drove east towards Sault Ste. Marie without stopping, gaslight blinking for miles before I finally coasted into a station. Every reflective highway sign looked like a person stepping from the shoulder. I never called the police. Part of me felt ridiculous, nothing taken but food, no clear shot of a face, just a story that sounded like late-night paranoia. I emailed the property owner a single sentence. Cabin felt unsafe, leaving early. Sorry for the short notice. No elaboration. For weeks afterward, my body jerked awake at 2:43 a.m. no matter how exhausted I was. Sometimes dreams locked me back in that wooden box, the hooded man framed by the window pane, waiting. I moved into a new apartment in Lansing, swapped every lock, even adopted a shepherd mix that barks at corridor footsteps. Yet the sense of being observed still lingers at the edges of sleep. I have told 2 friends fragments of the experience. never showing them the footage, because the idea of sharing his image feels like offering him a doorway. I do not know if he lived near Lake Independence or simply noticed my arrival and decided I would make an interesting subject. The strangest part is how everything ceased the moment I left that patch of forest. It is as if the watching belonged to that tract of land or the cabin itself, and stepping away severed the tether. That is the whole story. No clever twist, no tidy resolution. I think about it more often than I should, wondering whether he has chosen another stranger since then, or if I was the only one who ever recognized him. Either way, I am finished with secluded cabins and finished with isolation. If you are reading this and planning a remote escape to clear your head, double check that you will truly be alone out there. Dear folks, thank you so much for enjoying tonight's stories. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our channel. This way, you keep the darkness coming. Until next time.